Hello and welcome. My name is Joanne Mickens. I'm the Executive Director of Parents for Public Schools, and we are excited to present this discussion this afternoon on a topic that, if implemented, can make a real difference in unlocking the potential of every student, even those who are most difficult to reach. Now, those of you who may not know PPS, we have been around. The national office has been here since 1991. And our mission is to ensure that families and communities are advanced in making sure that our children have access to quality, equitable public education. We hope to one day live in a nation where families are actively engaged in strengthening our public schools, because public schools are so foundational for not only our children, but for our entire way of life. So thank you for joining us. And without further ado, I want to present the facilitator of today's discussion, Colleen Dibble. Colleen is a recent addition to the national staff. She is our chapter services director. And she has joined the national staff after serving as the executive director of our Pitt County, North Carolina chapter for several years. So now, without further ado, here's Colleen.
Thank you so much, Joanne. I'm happy to be here, and welcome to everyone who is either with us as we're recording or watching us later. I have the pleasure today to introduce Winsome Waite. Winsome Waite, Ph.D., is a senior program director at the Opportunity Institute. She works at the intersection of policy, practice, and research with an emphasis on implementation of policy to ensure equity. She is responsible for leading teams and projects for impact within K-12 education while informing the national conversations on whole child equity as a North Star for educational transformation. Her current work focuses primarily on adolescent learning and development. Winsome has over 3 decades of progressive experience in K-12 education, serving among senior education leaders at various levels of education systems. She is a former teacher in early childhood, elementary, and secondary schools, a graduate school instructor, and a program leader in school district and education nonprofits. Winsome has a broad skill set and content area expertise, including leadership development, deeper learning, school improvement, professional learning, and multi-tiered systems of support. She has led diversity, equity, and inclusion program work in various organizations and at the school district level. Additionally, she is an experienced technical coach who has worked with education leaders at the state, district, and school levels to build equitable educational programs with support for capacity building and implementation. Winsome is highly skilled in using research and evidence to plan and implement innovative and impactful improvement programs and initiatives to advance a holistic education for K-12 students. She holds a bachelor's and master's degree and a doctorate from Notre Dame of Maryland University in education leadership. Join me in welcoming Winsome Waite. So before we get started with our questions today, we do want to let folks know that today is informational and will not include a live question and answer session. However, your questions, all of you who have joined us from, I'm reading the chat, there's folks from all over the country here, welcome. So your questions are important to us, and we encourage you to place them in the chat so that we can determine the types of questions that our viewers are interested in as we prepare further tools and programs. And of course, if there is a question that you need to discuss with us after our presentation today, Julius will be putting the contact information in the chat, and you are welcome to call us or email us to discuss those questions at any time. At this time, we are going to get started and hear from Winsome Waite about culturally responsive teaching. Welcome, Winsome. It's good to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much, Colleen, for having me, and welcome everyone.
So Winsome, as we start today's webinar about culturally responsive teaching, probably the first question that makes sense to ask is, what is culturally responsive teaching? So could you help us provide some definition for that?
Absolutely. I'll take a stab at that, Kylene. I would say in a nutshell, we all have a sense already of what cultural responsive teaching and learning, I do like to add the word learning too, really what it is. But in a nutshell, it really is about how our teaching practices, particularly in school and in classrooms, celebrate and uplift the diversity of our student body, the students, their parents, and their community. That's in a nutshell. And what these practices do, we integrate them. We use them to advise our planning. We build upon these practices in ways that really reflect all of our students in the curriculum and in the way we deliver curriculum in our instructional programming. This way, the students really feel a sense of belonging in the classroom. They can personally identify with the content and the subject matter. So that's really broadly what we mean. Learning is really highly relational. It really, we learn so much more when we're part of one another, teacher to student, student to student. And it's also, more appealing, and we learn so much more when we can tap into prior knowledge, into our background. There's nothing, in any of us more important than understanding who we are and see who we are reflected in any conversation, and certainly the conversations in classroom. So when learners see themselves in the classroom, what we are doing as educators is setting up the conditions that are necessary to learn. And we set up a condition where it's an us, a we versus a them or a they. And that sets the stage for all of us to learn and grow together. So I would say cultural responsive teaching is part of the work that we do at the Opportunity Institute. And it is the work that Southern Echo, our partner in Mississippi, uses as part of this whole child equity framework that we embrace. And Southern Echo really used to drive a lot of its advocacy and policy. So I do want to acknowledge that work that we do with Southern Echo. When we think about a whole child equity framework and its relationship to whole child equity and cultural responsive teaching, it's really a strengths-based approach, really recognizing that teaching and learning is more than just the content and the academics. It's really about bringing the student to center in that classroom and the strengths that they bring with them. We also know that in order to do well academically, our students have to have the full range of their needs taken care of in a positive way. And so this work really taps into a broader approach, again, in whole child equity, really understanding the health and the well-being of our young people in a spirit of caring and a spirit of belonging. And so it's about working together, parents, families, community, with the education system. I do want to expand just a bit on culture as we set the stage here. Everyone has culture. We are all part of a family, a community. We all have sets of practices, way of life that forms who we are culturally. And so we're thinking broadly of culture when we think of culture in the classroom. We recognize there are very finite ways to think of culture in terms of school culture and home culture. We're thinking now of groups of people who share common beliefs, common attitudes, common ways of communicating, celebrating, and so on. The two things I'll quickly say about culture, and then we'll move on, Kylene, is that very often when we think culture, we think about what we see and what we hear. We hear different languages, different ways of communicating. We see people's dress and how they celebrate. And that's important to our young people to see in their classrooms and in school. But we also know that there's a deeper culture that's important to teaching and learning. And that deep culture, it's like that iceberg. We often use that metaphor when we talk about culture. It's that iceberg where you see the visible part of the iceberg on top, but most of it is below the surface. And yet it's so important to the functioning of that iceberg. And so when we think about culture in the classroom with teaching and learning, recognize that, even students who are coming to us from certain groups, and we think of them as having those cultures, they don't necessarily all have the same beliefs. They don't do things exactly the same way. So I want to quickly say we really cannot expect that our teachers are going to understand all these dimensions of culture to be able to still embrace culturally responsive teaching and learning practices in the classroom. Culturally responsive teaching and learning practices, they're good for everyone. They're good for the child or students who see themselves in the curriculum, but it's also good for those students who are not seeing themselves at that given moment because they're actually learning about others. And as our students go through our K-12 classroom, we really want them to go out into the big world learning about other people, how to work alongside other people, and how to communicate with other people. And so that's what our schools are all about, embracing one another and fostering vibrant learning.
Thank you so much for such a thorough explanation of culturally responsive teaching and sharing so many specific examples with us. Let's move now to another question that gets even more specific in this topic. Why is student motivation and engagement important in education? And what is the connection to culturally responsive teaching?
Wow, that's a big question. I'll attempt to be very brief though on that one. So we know that there's no learning without engagement. That's a fact. Adults don't learn unless they're engaged. So certainly students won't learn unless they're engaged. Motivation drives learning. The more motivated we are to do things, even as adults, certainly students, they're more motivated to stick with it and to really ensure that they're putting in the effort. If we, for example, take sports or other group activities, team activities, we see that all the time. We see that, you know, no matter what the cultural background of people in these activities, say sports, for example, we're celebrating their strengths and we're celebrating their contributions as part of those team activities. So it is important to think about these culturally responsive practices, and they're broad. There's not a little list of them that I can say here, if you do these 6, you're gonna get it, because it's much more of an idea, the way we think about teaching and learning actually, but there's certainly specific strategies that really are applicable to this environment. It is really important for, again, our students to feel valued and to feel valuable in the learning process. And if we embrace and integrate their backgrounds in books, in videos, in problems, in the scenarios we bring to the classroom, very often those students perk up and they're more likely to engage with their teachers. So motivation and engagement, those are big topics well written about in education books. Research studies are done on them. And there's no doubt that it's important to ensure that our students are motivated and engaged. Culturally responsive teaching practices, it's one lens through which we can foster that engagement. One of the bodies of the work that we work together with Southern Echo on is the science of learning and development. And within that sphere, learning scientists, neuroscientists really think of relationships as what they call kind of the fertilizer for the brain. In order for the brain to learn and grow and be at its best, it really needs to have positive relationships. And so when we think about the classroom, where you have many students interacting, teachers, co-teachers, parents coming in as volunteers, those relationships are very important. And those relationships, once they are built on a sense of trust, which integrates, again, your background, your culture, who you are, really goes a long way in engaging our students. You know, the context of learning can be very difficult for some of our students, very difficult. And so what we're trying to do here is to do all we can to bring the student to center. So when the math problem is just too difficult, they're willing to go that extra mile because they see themselves, they know they belong, and they have people around them who are supporting them just for who they are and the whole self that they bring to the classroom.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone there is taking notes or will watch the recording later, because I feel like you're giving so much information. I feel like a sponge just sitting here with you.
Awesome. Lots to learn here.
There's so much good information here. I think you began to touch on this, but let's go a little deeper into maybe share with us some culturally responsive strategies that do support student engagement.
Right. I think I'll begin by saying there are tons of specific strategies that teachers can and do use in their classroom. They're in textbooks, they're online. If you Google these strategies, they're just hosts of them. I think what I want to bring forth more today is that it's really kind of a mindset that educators, teachers in general, really embrace this approach and understand it. And then we can find what strategies work in our math class, for the science lesson, for the PE activity. Let's really embrace the overall mindset and approach. So I'll start there. And I'll start by using the work of educator and author Zaretta Hammond. And she wrote the book, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And the subtitle is actually Promoting Authentic Engagement and Rigor among culturally and linguistically diverse students. And what she offers to us is a 4-part framework. It's called Ready for Rigor. So I want to go with the framework, the broader strategy, if you will, and then we can talk about very specific strategies that teachers will from time to time. Some people do this very well and others are really developing their craft. The 4-part, the first one is to, as she says, is to build awareness. And that awareness is extremely important. Building awareness of our own cultural lens. As an educator, a teacher, how do we see culture? How much do we value it? What do we know about it? How intrigued are we to learn more about it? The other part of this building awareness is, as teachers, especially today, I might say, really trying to understand the socio-political context within which we're working at any time. How do we still ensure that we are embracing the best of ourselves and the best of our students, no matter the context within which we're working, whether it's around race or racial disparities, different language, some language challenges, language barriers, really looking at the cultural assets that we have in our classroom and recognizing that when our students come, they have needs, but they're not deficits. They're actually assets. The other thing she says is that we should form partnerships as teachers, as educators, that we can't do this alone. Now, we hear that a lot, right? We want to make sure that we form partnerships first with our students and their families. That's most important. So as teachers, and the relevance of this for teachers is the same on the parent side. How do parents work hard to form partnerships with school and with teachers? It's going to be a win-win situation. The more we form partnerships, the more we work together, the more we share and listen, the more we really understand not just each other's differences, but our unique challenges, but also our similarities. And we can really build on those strengths. The other thing she says is to ensure that we're delivering or instruction or curriculum in a way that really provides multiple avenues through which students can really learn content, especially difficult content that, you provide as a teacher, maybe a direct instruction where you're telling them, you have them to have conversations. They might watch a video in which they see another culture, really, they see role models on screen, and really help our students to stretch, if you will, the brain. and working through those difficult situations in a culturally responsive way can really promote learning. And the other thing she says is to operate the classroom as if it's a community. And so that's really important for parents to know that they are part of a classroom, they are part of a school. The school and the community really are one. And so all the activities, the celebrations, kind of going back to the surface culture now, all of those things that are happening around us, if teachers can actually build upon them and help students to see content and subject matter through those experiences, students are going to be more attuned. So specifically, I'll name one. I know we need to move on here, but I'll just mention like project-based learning, for example, which is a way of really engaging students to work together, solve problems together, bringing in different organizations, parents, coming together to bring the full array of issues that might be related to a problem and working together to really analyze and solve problems. It's really a great way to kind of bring community and school together in a cultural way. And we resolve issues that way too, that are actual issues within schools that we work on together collectively. So I'd say that's one. Of course, using the arts and music and field trips, those are all different ways to really advance cultural responsive teaching.
Thank you so much, Winsome. I think these are all great strategies. And my guess is that some teachers are already using them and maybe not making that connection, that they are a piece of culturally responsive teaching. So let's transition a little bit to talking about parents and help us understand why parents need to know about culturally responsive teaching and student engagement.
Great. I hope I've touched on that a bit just before, but just to look at that question very directly, you know, the mission of Parents for Public Schools says it well. It is to advance the role of families and communities in securing a high quality public education for each child. So that's what we're after. We're trying to ensure teachers are successful at what they're doing so that students can be successful. So why would parents want to know more? Because I would say that they already know. It's exactly what you just said. We don't always name the thing, but much of this is we already know. Parents already know that they want their students to feel a sense of belonging in the classroom. Parents themselves want to have a sense of belonging when they're in schools. Parents already know that they want their students to feel like they can contribute to the learning environment. Parents themselves know that they have a lot that they can contribute. And so I think being aware really of these practices and the need to ensure that teachers themselves are aware really help parents to advocate better, first of all, for their own role in school, and the role that their children and their children's families writ large really have to play in an academic setting, that the voice and the experiences of family, of community, of culture really play an important part in the school. And it's a contribution that when you can contribute to the learning environment, it's not just top down, the teacher is not just telling, but the student and is able to also contribute, and parents are engaged. I think some of the things that I think are important here is for parents to really think about these practices again, not so much as, well, I don't know, you know, what strategy would work here, but it's really understanding that it's kind of a mindset of how we collaborate. I think it's important also for parents to understand these strategies so that they recognize opportunities. when they can be called upon to really advance what teachers are doing in school. So I would say, for example, there are many community activities that happen. Parents are really connected to those community activities, and teachers aren't always aware of them. Because parents now know that some of these celebrations, some of these activities are very central to how students process information and learn in school, parents can bring that information to teachers and say, hey, do you know? Would you like me to? I would be happy to share this with your class. So I think just by understanding the importance of these practices, the relevance of them in helping students to learn content. And I think that's the connection we're making here. I want to be very explicit that these types of approaches help students to learn math. So when they read a math problem and the math problem relates to something that's in a community, a playground maybe, or a park, and students are asked maybe to take a walk in that park and look at the different dimensions, it really is a way of saying, this is your community, this is your home, and it's valuable in how you learn math. So it really is that connection for parents, I think, to understand that really these, not only are parents more able to be present in the teaching learning process, but they see the value in what they bring. And again, they advocate for these practices more. Not only are they advocating for the teachers to do it, they're building themselves into the school and into the classroom more.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think you really touched on something that we value at Parents for Public Schools, each player having a role. So you really talked about parents being able to provide information without going in and taking over the classroom. And this really becoming a collaborative effort between parents and teachers. Thank you so much. I think you've already touched on our last question just a little bit, but I think maybe you have some a little deeper information to share as we think about what can parents do to contribute to culturally responsive teaching?
A lot, quite a lot, and very simple things too. Not so much the thing that comes home as an assignment, but really just our way of being. I like to say to the adults, parents, and teachers alike that our children are watching us. I like to say that. And I think when they watch us and watch our relationships and watch how we work together or not, really affects how much they embrace what goes on in the classroom and in school. And what we have to remember too as parents is that our students just don't learn in school. They just don't learn when they're in the classroom. The brain is designed to learn, and it's learning all the time, with or without our help. It's learning. And so I would say that parents can contribute a collaborative atmosphere, a way where they do advocate strongly for what they know their children need and what they can contribute. That they have these conversations, hard conversations if they need to, with teachers, with principal. I think that's very important, but doing it in a way of service to learning. And service to learning is really in a more positive relational way. And so I think there are many things parents, again, can do and should do. And one of them is advocate for the best education and ensuring that their children have a seat at the table, and they too have a seat at the table, that they can bring their whole selves to school and feel that this is their school, this is their community. But I would say that the relationship that teachers and parents form is probably one of the most important. As you mentioned in my bio, I've done work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all three parts are important when it comes to culturally responsive teaching and learning. Diversity, I like to say, is a little bit like counting heads. Who do we have here? We can kind of see diversity. Inclusion, though, is really that belonging. Like, I'm including in all aspects. And so parents being able to bridge with the classroom teacher a sense of belonging for their students, and that happens through relationship. The equity part of diversity, equity, and inclusion is to make sure we work with our teachers as parents to help teachers identify the needs that our students have. We do say all the time, schools should address the needs of our children, and that's correct. Many times the school day is moving so fast. It's so helpful when I was a classroom teacher for a parent to come to me and say, I just want you to know this today about what's going on. I just want you to know these are some needs for the next month we have. And I think that communication and collaboration with the school is foremost, I would say, an activity, even a responsibility, if you will, of our parents. I do think visiting school, being part of school, just embracing school activities. And this is not to say that we should not push back on school. I think we can do both in service of our student learning. So know where the opportunities are. Yeah, know where the opportunities are for you parents, and jump in and do it with grace and also with expectation.
Thank you so much for this information. I know that everyone on the call and watching the webinar today has benefited so much from this information, and how we as parents, and I'm not only a staff member with Parents for Public Schools, but I gained so much as a parent from this webinar today about how I can be more inclusive and more attentive to culturally responsive teaching for my children and their friends and all children that I work with. So thank you for sharing this today, Winsome.
Absolutely.
I'm going to turn everything back over to our Executive Director, Joanne Mickens, who I believe is going to close us out.
I am, and like Colleen, Winsome, I want to thank you for some very good information. I just was sitting here saying more, wish we had more time. So hopefully we can do more in the future. And for those of you who joined us today, I want to thank you and let you know how much we appreciate your attendance, and hope that you gained as much from this as did I. And please take a minute to complete the feedback form. The link should be in the chat. And if you want to hang around maybe 2 minutes, if you have a question, if you want to stick it in the chat, otherwise we'll just save it for next time. Thank you so much for being here. And we are planning to do these types of discussions on a regular basis. So if you will share with us your contact information, we'll make sure you hear about it. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. Thanks again, Winsome.
Thank you.
And Colleen,
Thank
thanks
everyone.
to you as well.